You're watching postPerspective's Meet the Artist podcast, sponsored by Puget Systems.
Hi, I'm Randi Altman, and welcome to the latest episode of our Meet the Artist podcast. For this edition, I spoke with Visual Effects Supervisor Lesley Robson-Foster, who you might know from The Knick, Boardwalk Empire, and most recently, The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. I hope you enjoy our conversation. So let's talk a little bit about just your work. You recently finished up 5 seasons of The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, which was phenomenal. I mean, just in terms of people loving it and also the production value. So how was that for you, and how was it different than working on other shows that you've worked on? And how did the visual effects progress over those 5 seasons?
Mrs. Maisel was an amazing job. I mean, I've been doing period work for a long time now. I seem to have got in that niche of, from Boardwalk Empire to The Knick to all those different things that I worked on. They were period. So Mrs. Maisel had that as a factor, but it also had a sort of a slight magic realism thing going on. And also, like any big, nice, epic show, we weren't going to bring an airplane to the set. I had to make it, or we weren't going to, really fill the Apollo with 3,000 people. We had to make it, and all the rest of it. So it was an amazing show because there was the writers and the showrunners are the type of people who, with advice, we said to them, don't think about how, write what you want, and then let's talk about how we'll do it. So that's my favorite thing, and that was true on other shows I've been on too, like Boardwalk Empire. Terry Winter, who created that, always said, I couldn't have done it until the advances in visual effects with the period thing and all the rest of it. He says that. So, I think that people have to know what's possible, but they shouldn't think in practical terms. They should just write it, and then we'll have the fight about, can we afford it? Can we do it? And everything. And, with a show like Mrs. Maisel and a team like I had, I always try and build an in-house team. So we're the face that the director sees, and we do the heavy lifting with look dev and previs and all that kind of stuff. And then it goes to the vendors. And I like to work like that. I'm the person on set, and the director knows to come to me. And that's how I've really enjoyed working it. And it makes you a very integral part of the crew. And over the progression of the 5 seasons, that just became more and more true. Like, the production designer deciding that part of the set could be virtual, or helping the DP with a big trick lighting effect, or all of the different things. So in answer to your question about the progression, it was just more and more, becoming part of the core group, which, how can you argue with that? It's what I'd like to say to people starting off in the industry. Just make sure you don't get lost in the fact that it's just computer graphics or something. It's so much more if you're lucky enough to get in, on the production side. And sometimes we do miniatures instead of CG. We would build, a 6-foot oil rig and put it right here close to the camera, so it looked like a huge one back there. So it was a chance to do so much interesting stuff. It was just the really great show to work on.
Now, you mentioned virtual production. So how much of the show was virtual production, and when did that start? Because some people will argue there's been virtual production around for a long period of time, but it really sort of kicked in during the COVID era. So what were you able to accomplish with virtual production? And were you using LEDs? Were you using green screens? What was the whole process?
So I'll argue with the term virtual production, because the truth is, since, time immemorial, you could call it whatever you wanted, but something wasn't there when you shot it. And then how did you get it there? Was it a glass matte painting? Was it a green screen? What was it? So in all of the television shows I've been doing, and I've been doing this job for 40 odd years, there's been some form or other of that. We just started calling it virtual production, and I wonder if there's a differentiation between virtual sets and virtual production. And, I've never heard such misinformation in all my life before as when the Mandalorian came out and everybody's like, "Oh, that's it. We don't need you anymore. We don't need anything," without realizing that you needed a lot more up front, and you needed to have the kind of director who would make a decision about the shot and what you'd see. And that's pretty uncommon in the world of television, to have directors and DPs who will, spend the time up front and make it. It's not the most common thing. They'll rather work with nothing than be locked into that set over there. The amount of times I've been on a tech scout and the director will say, well, we'll dress all of this 180 degrees, and then you get there in the day and they go, oh no, I need to turn around and look the other way. So it's not for everyone. So again, depending on your definition of what it is, I've been doing it with green screens and rear projection and all models and miniatures and CG and everything for many years, and it depends on the filmmaker to what you can do. Now, with Mrs. Maisel, that those filmmakers, like to design mad wanners that looked 360 degrees all the time, that went on for 12 minutes, and and all of the things that we had to do. So virtual stages, like I think that you mean, were not a thing for us. We just could not create. I mean, there just wasn't one in existence that was like that you could get into and really work with. So there's many ways to skin the cat, and a lot of the production and the set extensions and the airplane, the crowd tiling, the theater that wasn't there at all, the stadium that wasn't there at all, and all of those things, I call them virtual.
You're watching PostPerspectives Meet the Artist podcast, sponsored by Puget Systems.
Just looking back on the visual effects from season 1 to season 5, was there something, thanks to technology, and I'm not even talking about virtual production, but other kinds of technology that you were able to do and pull off in season 5 or 4 that you weren't able to do in season 1?
Maybe face replacements and deep fakes and things that they sort of came into their own to be a lot better looking and possible in the time within the budget and everything. At the end, we were doing a bit of that, which we wouldn't have done 5-6 years ago, perhaps as well. I mean, I would have done it, but I would have done it as a real comp, with having to do motion control, matching moves, and all that kind of stuff. So I saw that kind of change, and then there was a lot of crowd work in that show because she's always performing, in bigger and bigger and different spaces. So I did away with motion control, having to do matched moves, halfway through, just because the filmmakers were Steadicam fans, and they just, they wanted to run around and around, and I just couldn't get them the shot that they wanted with motion control. So, I had to torture my people and vendors into doing 10 different not matched moves at all to make a crowd scene or something. So that changed, being able to track things and steady things up and everything. So everything's changing all the time as we go along, and you must keep up, you must watch everything and keep up and talk to who's on the cutting edge, and and don't get lost in the things that look like they're an answer to everything, but in the case of that show, were not right for us.
Now, you mentioned being in Paris when the strikes shut you down. What project was that? And can you talk a little bit about it?
I think I can. It's an Amazon show. It's the same filmmakers, and it's called Étoile. And it's Amy Sherman Palladino and Dan Palladino, the people who created Mrs. Maisel, have come up with it. So it's about the ballet, and it's half in Paris and half in New York. So
is it a time? Is it from a different time, or is it present?
No. It's not a period piece this time. It's modern. So I think I probably can't tell you the story particularly, but it's modern day, and it's going to shoot in both places.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
I imagine that the dancing is going to be a big part of what you provide, unless you have only professional dancers as the main, the main actors, I'm assuming. So how have you been preparing for that?
We've just been working on a lot of the ballet studios have mirrors everywhere. So, I've been working with the production designers trying to work out how to deal with that. And then, yeah, there'll be some things with actors who can't dance and dancers who can't act and all that kind of stuff. So we've got to work out how to do all that.
You mentioned before that you were directing commercials and then you sort of pivoted. So how did you start in the industry?
So in 1976, 77, I went to art school. I left school at 16 and I went straight to art school in England, which you could then. And then I got a job at the BBC, which was kind of the, great training ground for a lot of people in the UK. And in those days, I really don't think it's true anymore. It was a proper apprenticeship. You were really taught to do your job, and then the people around you's job as well. It was really important that you knew everything. So I was at the BBC for about 5 years, and I was an animator, graphic designer, DP, started directing, and then, like most people, you would take all the skills you learned there and run off and do them somewhere else. So I came out of there and started directing commercials in the UK, and then came to the States via Lucasfilm Commercial Productions, which is, I don't think it exists anymore. It was a strange thing with a funny bunch of directors, and we were attached to ILM, but so all of the commercials had a visual effects component to them that we would do there, and that brought me to the States, um, and then another bunch of production companies, and then, like you say, I think it was around 2008, 2007. The work was intermittent, like it often is when you're a director. You get a lovely big juicy job, and then 3 months later you get another one, or what have you. And whereas it's very lucrative and all consuming for a minute, there was too many gaps. And then with the strike, it was too much gap for me. I'd rather be busy doing something else. So I jumped into episodic television, and I got onto Ugly Betty, which was in New York. A beautiful show, really got a soft spot in my heart for that. And and since then I've just been on television shows as visual effects supervisor and second unit director often, and everything else. That I know this is not what you've asked me, but I'm going to say it anyway. I'd like to, when I'm talking to people who are just up and coming, and talking to students and talking to people who want to talk about how to get into the business, I just want to make sure that people realize all of the different jobs that are in visual effects, and they call them visual effects degrees at these colleges, and they're just CG, they're just CG and compositing, and that's not all there is, and what I like doing very much, and it's the best thing I do, is having apprentices, having proteges, having people on my team who want to come up and could and stick on the production side, so that you can learn all of those things. And it's a more fluid job. It's not for everyone. Do you like being on set? Can you speak to the directors? Can you hold your own when somebody's being difficult? All of those different things. But it's a different branch of it, and I encourage anybody starting off to really find out about all the different jobs that there are, in the production side, not just post, because it's a misleading thing that the VFX belongs in post. Not true at all, as you know.
Yeah, it starts on set. So how would people starting out, they don't know what they want to do, how would they even find out all those different things and what they entail, and who could help them?
Well, I mean, I think that the trouble there is that you have to be brave enough to make the calls, and you have to watch everything you can watch, and search on all those behind the scenes things, and look at the credits and find the names and hit people up. I don't know anybody who's really doing it who would refuse to talk to an up and comer who was smart enough to want to talk. And I get calls all the time, and it maybe people don't do anything with it, but I mean, I do believe that you could get some help from people who've been in it a while, and you have to be brave enough to make the calls. But it's easier now than it used to be. When I was doing it, you actually had to write letters. Oh my God. Or make cold calls or something. Whereas now nobody minds an email. You ignore it or you don't. It's much easier these days. And I just think you need to sit there looking at the movies and looking at the behind the scenes and reading the trades and looking at your website and all those things and see who those people are and chase them and then chase many of them so that you hear a varied approach to how to get further forward, and ask to shadow people on set and all that kind of stuff. If you don't ask for it, you're not gonna get it. And just sitting in a post house, compositing or doing your CG, well, that's lovely, and it's really handy to know all that stuff. It isn't the be all and end all, and some people are more suited to the production end than the post production end, and vice versa too. I know.
Yeah, there's some people that want to be in a dark room by themselves, and
I
there are
appreciate
those that can't. Yeah,
it's and especially with working from home and all the rest of it, it's a very different world, because those people sitting in the dark room with their hoods up and their headphones on used to be what it was like at the vendors, and it's not true so much anymore. And I don't think it's that healthy to work from home when you're a young person who wants to get on. It's really good to speak to other people, but like you say, it suits some people very well. And isn't it great in our industry that you probably could do a hybrid version of that, or either or.
it's true. And I'm gonna let you go shortly, but one other question, which is, I know that you work pretty much solely in episodics. Well, two things, I lied. So one is, how are the budgets, not the budgets, actually the turnarounds, because you're working on streaming shows now versus broadcasts, and I know broadcast typically had very tight turnarounds. So are you working more on, would you say, like a film like schedule now with the streamers, or no?
Well, the main difference with, I've worked on quite a lot of movies, and the lovely thing about working on a movie is you prep it and then you do it, you shoot it, and then you post it. Whereas in episodic, mostly you're prepping, shooting, and posting at the same time, because that's how it goes, and you have to. I haven't worked on any network television for a million years. Luckily, I've ended up in the high end, of HBO land and all those kind of things. But it hasn't changed for the streamers, from when I was on Boardwalk Empire and that was on HBO, which wasn't a streamer. It was, it was terrestrial television, but it was cable.
Yeah.
We would still be working while the show was airing, and that's not very usual in the streaming world. But you still have to finish it ready to hand off to, like Amazon, for example, that I'm working for now, or Netflix that I've worked for before. So you mostly, at least you finish before they dump them on the internet, which is different and not so pressured. Because when you're on episode 6 and episode 1 is airing, it's chasing you and it's different. But you must plan all that stuff at the beginning, and there shouldn't be surprises that deadlines are pulled up. I mean, they occasionally get that, but mostly you know what you're doing, and you wouldn't have agreed to it if you didn't mean it. One would hope.
Right. And finally, just what about films? Do you miss it? Do you feel like you'll go back to that?
Do you know what? For the longest time, I would do two jobs at once. I would have a team of people on underneath me, on the movie, and then on a show that was prepping or whatever. And the movies always seemed. The movies that I did weren't great big visual effects movies, things like The Goldfinch or Steven Soderbergh's Logan Lucky or what have you. They had visual effects elements, but they were no Marvel shows or anything. And I know that I couldn't do that, so it's picking the project. So I like to do a movie. Yeah, it's nice. And when shows go on hiatus, getting a nice little, 6-month movie is very handy. But I really like the television. It's I like the fact that there's 10 hours or 8 hours and everything's different. It suits me, and I've been lucky with the things that I've got to do.
Thank you for watching postPerspectives Meet the Artist podcast, sponsored by Puget Systems. For more information, please visit pugetsystems.com.